Okay, good morning, everybody. We are at chapter 2, page 37, 36, 37. Good morning. If you want a copy, it's here. If you want a book, it's there. Got to warm up. All right. So until now, we've been discussing the meditations, various different meditations that one can explore during prayer. And focusing on the inspiration of love of God that we draw from our consciousness of God's presence in the world, meditation of awe that comes from a recognition of God's greatness in the world, and the notion of gazing at the glory of the King. We had an in-depth discussion that really that notion is found in other experiences as well, meaning we can arrive to this place of the glory, of gazing at God's glory through love of God, through awe of God. And we did an in-depth dive to understanding what that means to get lost in the presence of God. Okay, chapter 2. V'nei kol ha'inyanim ha'elu aruchim usturim lifnechem b'kama drushim hanitfasim uv'chsavim hakol kasher lakol ber hetiv. If you recall, this is an essay that was written by the 5th Rebbe, organized by the 6th Rebbe, with the agenda of making it accessible to the broader community. He organized it into chapters, and he organized it with summaries. So that's the kind of the energy of the teaching here. So he says all of these things are organized systematically in many discourses that are published and letters, and they are elucidated there very well. And I want to say that really there's an idea. There's deep meditations. Many of the ideas we've studied in various different discourses. And in fact, any discourse that we study has the potential for us to contemplate on the ideas that are discussed there. There's a general idea, it's brought down in the books of Hasidus, that sometimes when a person is not organized or spiritually inclined or learned enough to meditate on these deep ideas, one can simply put themselves in this notion that they're standing before God. And the question is, how do we get ourselves, so to speak, lost in this consciousness of God just with these ideas? So that's what he's going to focus on in this chapter. Let me give you one other introduction. There's a lot of meditative, a lot of methods of meditation out there. Eastern religions, even things that are neutral, meditation for the sake of calming the body, calming the nervous system. The meditation of Hasidic philosophy, mystical meditation, is unique. And that's what we're going to explore in this chapter. What is the uniqueness of mystical meditation? And how does one get there? And I want to suggest that to keep your mind open and your heart open. Don't write it off as you're hearing the teaching. Oh, this is not for me. This is only for like really holy people. Because in fact, it's very accessible with the right effort, the right time. Got to give it time. We can all achieve this, at least a sense of it. So he says, and this is what he says. After all of these discourses and letters and so on, at the end of the day, the matter is dependent on you, to know these things, and to comprehend them thoroughly and clearly. And to contemplate them during prayer, because that is the intention of the study. So, for example, we mentioned in the first chapter, we discussed it at length in earlier discourses, the idea of how God fills the world and how God encompasses the world. We've discussed the notion of the human being created as an internal being, which therefore physicality and challenge is the struggle of the human, as opposed to angels who are created from God's external energy. They can coexist with these realities of evil. So just take either of those ideas, and when we contemplate them deeply, we have the capacity to fully understand them, and then we can meditate on them. And the whole purpose of these great teachings, right? It says that the Talmud has a question: what is greater, study or action? And the Talmud concludes in a good Jewish way that study is greater. Why? Because it brings to action. So which one is actually greater, study or action? I'll leave that to you. But the benefit of study is that it brings to action. So what the Rebbe is telling us here is that the benefit, the whole purpose of these great discourses with all of their intricacies is in order for us to be able to pray with them. That's what they're all about. Kikol halimud vayediah hakaidemes hikahachana el ha'ikar. Study and knowledge is a prerequisite, it's a preparation to the main dish. If you go to a celebration and they pass hors d'oeuvres, you ever notice how on the sushi platter there's like a little piece of ginger? You know what that's for? It's to clean your palate so you can appreciate the next piece of sushi. Okay? It's very important. Most people just leave it in there because we're not sophisticated sushi eaters. But if you're a sophisticated sushi eater, you eat, I don't know if you eat it or you suck on the ginger in order to clear your palate so you can eat the next piece of sushi and really enjoy it. So imagine if you got a platter of ginger, right? You'd say, what's wrong with this picture? The whole ginger is there as a preparation for the sushi. The whole appetizers are just there to be an appetizer, to warm you up for the main course. So the whole purpose of study is just a preparation for the main dish. What is the main dish? That is, that during prayer, one should contemplate these ideas in great detail. That is, that when we pray, we expand the explanation of the godly matter that we are contemplating, to meditate on it and understand it with all of its detail. And it's not adequate just to have a general contemplation. So let's explain what that means. We read, not last week, but 2 weeks ago, we read the passage from Hayom Yom that explained 3 types of meditation. There's meditating on the intellectual idea, there is meditating on the energy of the intellectual idea, and then there's meditating on the godly energy in the intellectual idea. So what does it mean? So to meditate on the intellectual idea, that's the preparation for prayer. So you study something, and before you pray, you review the content in your mind. Meditating on the energy of the meditative idea, the intellectual energy of the meditated idea, or the light of that idea, means that we're not just reviewing it to understand it, but we're actually reviewing it to unpack it. So I'll give you another fascinating parallel. It's brought down in the teachings of Kabbalah that in order to receive, you have to be an empty vessel, right? If a cup is filled with water, you can't put water in it. But if the cup is empty, then you can fill it up. Your brain is also a vessel. So if your brain is busy processing information, you're not taking the information in. You ever talk to someone and you're having a debate, or you're trying to explain something to them, and as you're talking, they're trying to give you the answer. They're trying to counter what you're saying. They're not really listening to you. Why? Because their brain is already filled, right? So in order to really be a good listener, you have to empty your brain. You have to take the information in. In the Chabad practice, in the Rebbe's gatherings, all of the Rebbes, there was always somebody known as a chayzer. Chayzer was one who would repeat the teachings of the Rebbe. And it's very fascinating. There's a whole history around it, but oftentimes a Rebbe would only share a discourse for one individual. So here you've got this gold that's coming from heaven, and one person is hearing this. So this one person has to be able to receive this information and then transmit it and convey it to others, right? This is information that gets lost if you don't capture it. So in order to capture it, you have to really be open. You have to open yourself up. You open yourself. So there's in our present times, there's a family. There was a great rabbi. His name was Rabbi Yoel Khan. He passed away a few years ago, who came to the United States in 1950. He was actually on the ship when the previous Rebbe passed away. And when he arrived, he came in order to be, he had that kind of mind to be the individual who would repeat the teachings of the Rebbe. When he arrived here, he asked the Rebbe, who was then not yet the Rebbe, was in the year between the previous Rebbe and the Rebbe, he asked the Rebbe whether he should return to Israel. He came on a ship and he had an objective, and the objective was no longer relevant. So the Rebbe said, if the previous Rebbe sent you here, it was for a reason, so you should stay. And he became the chief chayzer, the chief repeater of the Rebbe's teachings for all the years. But later on in the 80s, there was a young family, 3 brothers, Rabbi Simon, Shalom, and Yossi Jacobson, 3 Jacobson brothers. Rabbi Simon Jacobson wrote a book, Toward a Meaningful Life. Yossi Jacobson, we call him Rabbi YY, is a great teacher. You can find his content on the yeshiva.net, a fantastic teacher. But he was the youngest of the 3, and they would sit right in front of the Rebbe, and they would hear the Rebbe's teachings, and then afterwards they would have to repeat it. So all the information was in their brain, but now you got to own it, right? You got to own the information. When we study, we take the information in. When do we process this information? So prayer is a time for processing. So we contemplate what it is that we just studied, and we begin to really analyze it and dissect it with all of its details, and it begins to get a life. It begins to get an energy. I've shared this before. Well, I'm not going to jump the gun on that. I'll come back to that soon. So prayer is when we kind of dissect the idea, the intellectual idea, with all of its detail. And you can't do that superficially. You've got to really invest yourself in it. You really have to meditate and contemplate on this. He says further, "Va'afim gam ha'inyan kvar yudui elav, umuvor etzle heitev." I have a problem with this, not with the text, but I have a problem with practice, because I read things and they go into my head, and I think I understand them, but then when I attempt to repeat it, like, okay, where's that story? Where's that anecdote? It's gone, right? Because I just read it. It was inspiring in the moment, but then it disappears. I do this particularly well with jokes. I don't do a very good job repeating jokes or stories. But anyway, but if I took the time to actually review the content, meditate on the content, then the content would come to life. And when you really own information, you don't lose it. You don't forget it, which is one of the gifts of teaching. When you get to teach, you own the content a lot more than when you study on your own. The Rebbe says that it's a quote, I think, from the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe, says that one who teaches others, a fascinating idea, one who teaches others, their mind and their heart becomes refined 1,000-fold. So the Rebbe said this is not a euphemism, right? If you could, and some of you may be familiar with Rabbi Leibel Wolf. He shares this idea that he wanted to take more time to study for himself. So the Rebbe said to him, if you spend 10 hours studying for yourself and you spend 1 hour teaching others, you're gonna gain more in the 1 hour that you teach others than the 10 hours that you study yourself. Because your mind, literally, like, what's the difference between studying something and owning the information, not owning the information? It's how refined your mind is. What's the difference? How much you connect to an idea, whether you study yourself or you teach it to others. It depends on the sensitivity and the openness of your heart. If your heart is open and sensitive and refined, you can accomplish a lot more in less time. So it's not the time in this context. It's the actual brain and heart that are processing this. Yes.
This meditation that we're learning about, not practice during service.
It is practiced during services. It's precisely during prayer, during services. Good. That's a great question. That's a great question. First of all, at the end of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe has a number of letters where he rebukes people, exhorts people to take time to pray. He says that the person who's leading the service during the week, who is running to work, should not lead the services. And he designates an amount of time that one needs to pray during the week, and minimum number of hours to pray on Shabbos where we don't have to run to work and so on. One has a tendency to want to stay up with the congregation. And there was a particular chassid who wrote this to the Rebbe, and he said, I don't have time to really own the prayer if I'm trying to stay up with the congregation. So the Rebbe said that prayer has to be done with a quorum, to pray with 10. He says the real quorum is the quorum inside yourself, right? We have 10 powers of the soul. We have to use that quorum to pray with. So the Rebbe suggested that what he should do is that he should listen to the congregation as they're praying. He should start the prayer, and he should pay attention and answer all the amens and the kedusha and the moedim, all the other things that the congregation says. But he should go at his own pace, and he'll fulfill his obligation to pray with the congregation by answering those things. But ultimately, he's praying with his 10 powers. So again, in practice like this, it's not. There was a rabbi in California who used to say, we live in a jet age. Everything happens much more quickly these days. Our primary role today is the role of action. So prayer is, once upon a time, prayer was the primary service. Today, action is the primary service of God. However, it doesn't mean that prayer is out the window. It means that one should take a prayer of the daily prayer or the Shabbos prayer and pause on that prayer and invest yourself in that prayer. In other words, don't expect to spend if you try to do the entire prayer, you'll literally be there all day. And maybe on Shabbos, you can do that if you have time. And on occasion, one should take a day where they invest themselves in prayer. It's not going to be a daily occurrence. That's the reality. Yeshiva students have a greater ability, but by the way, to pray at length, maybe not so much in our modern times, but in the times of the yeshiva of the 5th Rebbe and the 6th Rebbe, to pray at length, you had to receive permission. If you showed up late to class and you hadn't received permission to pray at length, you got a slap on the wrist. Today, you really get a slap on the wrist because but on occasion you got to do it. I confess my sins today. It was actually, I remember clearly the day. It was It was the day that the Rebbe had a stroke in 1992. And I chose to stay home that day so that I can pray. And so I was praying. I spent an inordinate amount of time focused on prayer. And then when I finished praying, we heard that the Rebbe had a stroke, and then we went to 770 to say Psalms and so on. But it's not something that we do every day. It's something we do on occasion where we focus on prayer. Does that adequately answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. By the way, prayer is so delicious. It's really, that's the translation of the Yiddish word geschmack. To really pray is really powerful, and it's very uplifting, as we're going to continue discussing in the discourse. And we deprive ourselves of it. We deprive ourselves of it because we don't, number one, we don't know how to pray, which is what we're doing, is learning how to pray. And we also think that we have to get through prayer because we have to go to work. But the reality is that work, the blessing of work comes from God. And he's going to talk about that. The blessing of work comes from God. So if you want God's blessing, pray. So you're making the secondary the primary and the primary the secondary. Okay, let's keep on going. So in prayer, we contemplate the ideas that we studied in their detail. And we can't do this superficially. Let's say you understand the subject matter very well. So you say, look, I studied this particular passage or this discourse many times. I can repeat it to you, no problem. I know the content. So then when I come to prayer, I think that because I know it well, I can just contemplate it in a very general sense. He says that's not called meditation. That's not called contemplation. Listen to these words. Because then the light does not shine in the inner recesses of his brain and heart, rather only in this kind of superficial, encompassing manner on the heart, on the brain. There's in the Shema, I don't know where this teaching is from, but I heard it from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory. In the Shema, we say you should teach this to you should teach this to your children, and you should speak in them. No. And these words should be al levavecha, on your heart. So it says, why on your heart? It should be in your heart, right? Why it doesn't belong on the heart. So he says that you can't, I'm going to draw a parallel, you can't put things in people's heart. You can put things on people's heart. And at the right time, when they open themselves up to it, then it goes into the heart, right? We try to, it's a very powerful idea because we have this notion, I'm listening to a podcast on codependency. We have this notion that if I just say it enough times, the person I'm codependent with is going to own it, right? If I just tell my children enough time how to live life, they're going to live life that way. You have no control over when it goes into someone's heart. You can just teach it, right? I also heard in a parenting course one saying, like, by the time your kids are like 12 or 13, they've heard all your lectures already. They don't need to hear your lectures anymore. So stop lecturing them. It's not going anywhere. It's already there. When they open their hearts up, then it'll go in, right? So what's the key? The key is that the heart is open. And that's what he's telling us. If we want these teachings to go into our brain and into our heart, the way to open our brain and to open our heart is through meditation, intense meditation, thorough meditation. Otherwise, just because we know the information, it's just that. It's just information. And it's going to stay on top of our brain, not going to go into our brain. So you'll say to yourself, okay, I know the content. I'm having a general contemplation, and I'm getting excited about the teachings, right? So it must be that it's real, right? I know the content, I've studied it well, and I'm having a general contemplation about the teachings, and I'm getting intellectually excited about what I'm meditating on. Must be that it's real. He says no. or you get excited in your heart, and you're getting excited in your heart that you want to connect to God. He says very powerful words. This is a, how does he translate it here? It's illusionary. I think that's I don't think that's a correct translation. Kaizev means false. It's a false, which I guess is what an illusion is. It's a false imagination. You're imagining something. You're imagining that you're excited. You're imagining that your brain is excited, you're intellectually excited, or your heart's emotionally excited. What's the proof of it? How do you know if something's not real? What's truth? Truth is something that's consistent, it's everlasting. And if I'm meditating on something and it's not real, the proof will be is that it doesn't last very long. Get excited, and then how long does it last? Disappears.
Meditation, speaking now. I know it's not a question, but if you're thinking like something you're learning the Torah, or speaking praying while you're grounding.
Yeah, so we're talking about while we're praying. So maybe I need to give the punchline a little bit, even though he's going to discuss it many times. This is what I was going to say later, but I'll say it now. I've shared this idea before. There's a form of therapy that's very popular now called IFS, Internal Family Systems. Sounds like you got to work with your family. No, it's the family inside of yourself. And I've actually done some of this therapy, so I'm speaking from firsthand experience. And the idea is that it's actually very much aligned with Hasidic practice and approach. In a lot of popular therapy today, there's this notion that you have to rewrite your narrative, right? You have to rewrite the coding. You got to change the neural pathways of your brain. There's a lot of self-judgment there and a lot of shame involved in that. Internal family system says if I'm experiencing something, if I'm triggered by something, there's a story inside of me that I need to get in touch with. Not necessarily even a story, like I don't have to have a narrative, but there's something going on. There's a deeper trigger, there's a deeper base for why I get triggered from this and this kind of reaction. So the therapy takes you to that place. It's not voodoo. Just simply by taking the time to close your eyes and try to experience it, you get in touch with that part of yourself. You ever notice where somebody says something to you and you get triggered, and you know in that moment that you're the problem, not them, but you don't have enough pause within your experience to be able to control yourself from shooting your mouth off, right? And then you blow things up, and then you got to repair the damage. Ever happened to anybody? Never happened to anybody here. Okay. I'm unique in that way. So what's missing? What's missing is enough of being in touch with the underlying cause of the trigger. And we don't want to go there because it's very uncomfortable there. So what do? When we have that the discomfort inside of ourselves, and we don't want to face the music that I have this discomfort, because whatever judgment we have about that discomfort, whatever story we've been told, I've mentioned this therapist who has a fantastic podcast. His name is Brad Reedy. He wrote a book, The Death of Ego, or something like, I think that's one of his books. In other words, accepting your terrible, horrible, rotten self or something, right? In other words, we've been told since we're children that we have to be good. So if I'm experiencing something that makes me feel not good, so I immediately go to the judgment, I must be bad if I have this feeling. And you're not bad and you're not good because of that feeling. You just have a feeling. If you can be okay with the uncomfortable feeling, so when you get that trigger, the more you're in touch with that feeling, when you get that trigger, you say, okay, so it's uncomfortable. I'm going to be with that discomfort. And I don't judge it. And I don't point the finger the other way. I'd say this is my makeup. I'm made up with this discomfort for whatever reason. It's great to bring God into the equation. It's part of God's master plan that I should have these flaws. But until you feel that, until you're willing to feel that discomfort, you're going to always have, it's going to be very difficult to have the pause between the trigger and the response. Does that make sense?
It's like sort of a way of asserting control over feelings rather than them control you.
That's the end result, but it's not even that. That's already a judgment, right? Because you have a narrative that you have to be in control of yourself. Don't even go there. It just is what it is. It just is what it is, right? I'm uncomfortable now, right? You cut yourself and you immediately say, oh, I'm in pain. I got to go find some cream to put on the cut and I got to find a Band-Aid and stop. Just be in the pain. I mean, with a cut, you probably got to take care of it, but this is an inner cut, right? And where does that inner cut come from? You're not at fault for having that inner cut. And nobody's at fault, right? It may have come from your genetic wiring. It may have come from your parents, stories that they told you, but that's not their fault either. They also had wounds. And that's just the reality. So you're in a place where you have this discomfort. Just be with it. Think of it as a child who got hurt, right? The right way to deal with a child who got hurt, well, we're not dealing with a crisis, or not even got hurt. The other person took the child's candy and they're gone, right? So what do? We say, oh, I'll give you another candy. No, don't give the child another candy. I mean, at least not now. Just give the child a hug. Just be with them in their discomfort. You don't have to fix everything. Just be with them. When we immediately try to fix it, what we tell the child is that it's not okay to be uncomfortable, right? Now, again, we're not blaming anybody. This is new understanding of old teachings that we're able to apply. I'm trying to get you to the place where you can feel the discomfort within yourself and not run away from it and not judge it and not try to fix it. Just be with it. That's experience. That's true experiencing of self.
You're not working on trying to fix that. You're working on trying to not respond.
Right? That's a byproduct. You just want to be with it. You just want to be with it. If you're with it, you won't respond. Because your tendency to respond is a judgment. How dare you think that I am such and such? What's so terrible if they think that? That's their problem. I am such and such. In other words, whenever you get defensive, you're trying to protect yourself. You don't need protection. Just be with your discomfort. So if this lands with you in any way, I'm going to say it in the positive now. The objective of meditation is to feel what you're thinking in your body. That God is not an abstract idea. He's not even a fantastic essay that you understand really well, but it's actually an experience. You're actually experiencing in your body this notion that God fills the world. You're actually experiencing in your body that we are created by God's inner energy. Just experiencing it, not because you're going to do anything with it, just because you're going to connect with God in that way. And that's what the Rebbe is teaching us. How do we get to that place? How do we get to that place where the intellectual content, which is what we have to meditate on, moves out of the realm of the intellectual into the realm of the experienced? So first of all, you have to know the content. Number two, you have to meditate on the content with all of its detail. And just because you know the content and you meditated on it in a peripheral way and you find yourself getting excited, that's like going to a lecture of this therapist, and because you heard the lecture and it landed with you and you got excited about it, oh, now I'm a master of my feelings. No, you're not a master of nothing. You just experienced something very peripherally. Your heart is an animal and it got excited, and your brain, that's its wiring to get excited about profound intellectual ideas, and that's about the end of it. You don't own it. It's not part of you, the true you. It's just peripheral. Does this make sense? The true you will experience it. The true you will experience it. I'll give you another. I heard that tomorrow is Tu B'Shvat. It's the 15th of Shvat. It's the New Year's for the trees. And in 1984, the Rebbe instituted the daily study of Maimonides. It was in honor, I think it was in honor of the Rambam's 850th birthday, and the Rebbe instituted the study of Rambam. So we study Maimonides roughly about every 10 and a half months. We study 3 chapters a day. The Rebbe instituted 3 options. You can study 3 chapters a day, 1 chapter a day, or Maimonides also has a book called the Book of Mitzvos, where he explains each of the 613 commandments, and you finish that also in a 1-year cycle. So tomorrow we finish, I don't know what number cycle it is. It's 47, 48. I don't know how many cycles. So we went to an event last night. I went to an event last night where there was a celebration of this completion of this cycle. And there was a rabbi, not a Chabad rabbi, who shared the following teaching. He says that there are 11 times in the Torah from the beginning of creation until this week's Torah portion where God uses language of experience in the context of knowledge. Uses the word da'as or leida, to know. Knowledge seems like, so what is knowledge? And the Rambam, Maimonides, actually begins the commandment to believe in God, which is the opening commandment of his magnum opus. Maimonides uses the passage. He says, the foundation of all foundations and the pillar of all wisdoms is to know that there is a God that precedes everything. Not to believe, but to know it. What does it mean to know it? How can you know God? How can you know that idea? I mean, it's a nice intellectual idea, and it's a little bit of a brain twister, but how can you know God? It doesn't mean to know it. It means to experience it. It means to experience it. I didn't want to go down this path, but I'll go very briefly. Where's the first time we find knowledge in the Torah? Anybody? Huh? Yeah, what's the context? Adam knew Eve. The Alter Rebbe says this in the 3rd chapter of Tanya, that Adam knew Eve. That's a weird expression. He knew Eve. He didn't know Eve. And the Torah is not bashful, by the way. The Torah is very open in other contexts. What's the Torah teaching us? Is that an experience of intimacy doesn't require explanation. If you're being intimate, you're connected. You're connected viscerally. You're connected on the deepest of levels. There's no place for judgment there. It just is an experience. So knowledge, real knowledge, is not an intellectual energy. It's a connected energy. It's very deep. It's very profound. So if we want to get to that place of connection with God, to know God means to experience God. Okay, the avenue in is through knowledge. That's the intellectual knowledge. That's the opening part. And then we need to know the content. We need to contemplate all of the details of the content. And then it continues to make its journey. In parentheses, he says, if you're only meditating on the intellectual content, which you know very well, but you're only meditating on it in a peripheral manner, there's no guarantee that you'll even be moved emotionally to want to connect with God. Notwithstanding that your brain is moved by the godly idea, there's no guarantee that the heart will be moved by this. It's possible that the heart won't be moved at all. Put in other words, you can be intellectually excited about something, but not emotionally excited about it. Maybe the heart will be drawn to the idea a little bit superficially, that the heart will be moved in a little bit manner towards the brain. As we'll explain later on. You're forcing yourself, right? You're saying to yourself, I understand this idea so profoundly, and I'm excited about the idea in my brain. I want my heart also to feel it. So you force your heart. You pressure your heart to get on board. I should be excited about this, right? I should be excited about this. So because I should be excited, so I'm gonna try to feel it. I'm gonna try to open myself up to feeling it. But again, avul rak dimion shav. It's imaginative. When, however, the light is shining internally in your brain, it's not a peripheral experience, but it's really a profound internal experience. So then, then it naturally flows into the heart. You don't have to force the heart to experience something. The heart naturally, if you truly connect in a very deep, profound way with an intellectual idea, it's going to flow into your heart. It's like we see this physically. When one contemplates a good thing or a wondrous thing, automatically the heart is affected with a desire for that thing. You go to the Grand Canyon, you come back and you tell your friend, oh, you should have seen this place. It was unbelievable. And your friend says, tell me. So you start explaining what you saw. And you may be a little bit, you incorporate some of the science of it and the botany and the mountains. And okay. Yeah. Now, maybe this person wants to get excited with you. So they get excited with you. Wow, that's really cool. And maybe they actually warm up, but they don't own the excitement. They don't own the excitement. If, however, that person says, really invests themselves in hearing what you have to say, and then they go and study it, and they look at pictures. You know people. I know people who talk about, oh, it's one of my dreams to go to that place. I want to go see that country. I want to go see that site. Because they're living it. They read about it. They've looked at pictures about it. They heard stories about it. They want to experience it. So they're pining for it. Because they've invested themselves, not in a superficial way, but in a very internal way. They've never seen the place. But they've heard enough about it, and they've invested enough about it with their brain that it's now trickled down into their heart, that their heart wants to experience that. The is parentheses within a parentheses. The begashmi is the ikar tali bihis kashus verhergish atzmai k'mesha kasbim. We used an example from the physical realm, right? That when one contemplates something enough, their heart begins to desire it automatically. Even though in the physical realm, the key to excitement, to emotional excitement, is connection. Or as we use the language today, attachment. So the question is, if in the physical realm, in the physical realm, the requirement is attachment of the heart, so to speak, through the brain to the experience, how does that parallel in the spiritual? So he says that in the physical, the main experience of emotions, natural emotions, are not primarily born from the brain, but they come from elsewhere. And I would say superficially, in the case of the brain, in the case of the heart is an emotional being. It's an animal. So it doesn't require, when we're talking about connecting to physical things to get excited, it doesn't require that much of the brain. The brain is just a passageway. So attachment is adequate. But the emotions of the godly soul, because the godly soul is primarily intellectual, as it's brought down in Tanya that the godly soul rests in the brain, the animal soul rests in the heart. Godly soul, by definition, is higher, and therefore we use the brain as a parallel for the resting place of the godly soul. So to activate the godly soul, you got to use your brain. That's the primary birthplace of emotions. So therefore, to create a genuine godly emotion that's sustainable, it requires both things. It requires intellect, contemplation, and it requires attachment. With the physical, generally attachment is adequate. Right? You love your child, you don't need to understand why you love your child. You just have attachment to the child. You don't have to understand the steak to feel attached to the steak. Hopefully you're not too attached to the steak, but to connect in a deep level with the divine, that requires both contemplation and attachment. And meditation is attachment, as we're going to explain. Yes.
Well, a lot of Eastern religions, I think, Judaism, follow the seat of consciousness is that heart. But that's a debate since they found that there's neurological inroads to the heart, to the brain. There's a connection between the heart and the brain. Very often, when someone has a heart, replace the heart. What do you call it?
Transplant.
Transplant, that's right. I woke up on the wrong side of the bed this morning. But in a transplant, the person who has that transplant has the same emotions or experience as the person that passed away. So that was a transference that the heart had a consciousness of the experience of the other person. So we talk about, so where is the consciousness? Is it really in the brain or is it really in the heart? So in the Chinese medicine, they say something called the Shen. When in Chinese medicine, they say you have a bad Shen, meaning the emotional state of your person is having a corruptible or a experience of being negative. If someone has a negative Shen, their personality will be negative because they have a negative heart or the heart of the individual. But that's maybe just descriptive. So I'll just leave it for the conversation. We talk about seat of consciousness. Of course, I know there is a brain. I have one, but the connection between the heart and the brain are units. Not feel separate. I believe that's my feeling about it. But I just leave it for the discussion.
No, I think that lends support to what he's saying here. Is the seat of consciousness is in the brain, but experienced in the heart. And that's why to experience a godly, to experience God in a way that compels yearning, he's telling us here, requires both things, both contemplation and attachment. Attachment is an emotional thing. So that's a heart experience. And contemplation is a brain experience. And you attachment that only comes from the heart is animalistic. Attachment that's born from the brain is divine.
Shen. That's Chinese. I was studying acupuncture in Chinese medicine.
By the way, in the Eastern religions, the objective of meditation is to separate oneself from a consciousness around us.
That's correct.
And in Jewish meditation, especially mystical and Hasidic meditation, it's not about getting lost. It's actually about taking the consciousness of the world around you and bringing it into your meditation. Because the greatest experience of God is found through attachment. And attachment is not a removed experience, it's a very present experience.
Intellectually speaking, we have a lot of good concepts of Italian. But to get someone to realize those concepts, sometimes we have to go into meditation. There's a difference between contemplation and meditation. So meditation actually tried to demesmerize
oneself, because we're all been hypnotized into the physical negativity of this world, and how to break that negative experience, how to be able to experience what the Rebbe was talking about, is to be able to separate oneself. Well, that Eastern religion was trying to do that method of transcendental meditation, which was supposed to be. So I was in a group with a rabbi that was saying Jewish meditation is transcendental meditation. So that's another discussion. I'm going to try to explain about the difference.
So I beg to differ. I don't think that Jewish meditation is about separating oneself. I think the demesmerizing, to use your language, the demesmerizing is to separate out the physical consciousness of the physical and recognize the true identity of the physical.
They didn't say Jewish meditation was that. Eastern meditation is one that does the.
Okay, I misunderstood.
I make a distinction between Jewish meditation and transcendental meditation, because I had a rabbi, I had a teacher taught Kabbalah and meditation. Blessed memory, he's passed sometime. He was having discussions with gurus, having the discourse between what is the difference between Jewish meditation and transcendental, or the Swami Satchidananda, and he was having this discourse about having this. Okay. I don't know what this is.
Okay, to be continued. No, but that's good. It's good content. Okay, so let's keep on going. Towards the bottom of 39. The same thing is true spiritually. When the light, the inner light, shines in one's brain through adequate contemplation and meditation, so automatically the heart is moved to want to connect with God. The Kamei Baraz will explain further a little later on. However, when the light shines in a peripheral way, then the heart being moved by this is not guaranteed. And when one is moved, it's only an imaginative and a false kind of or illusionary experience. So that's the end of the parentheses. Therefore, when the contemplation, just because you know the content well and you meditate on it in a peripheral manner, it really does, and you may even have an experience where you're moved intellectually or emotionally. The bottom line is the result of this is not sustainable. After prayer, in the action of turning away from negative and doing positive. In other words, it doesn't really show up in our lives in a very real way. And again, using the parallel of this therapy, IFS, internal family systems, you can't, if you're not invested in the experience, you're not going to own the experience. It'll just be nice ideas that you can talk about and teach about, but you don't really own it. Let me just finish the paragraph. If you want to own it, where the experience is adequate to give you pause between the stimuli and the response, you've got to take the time to meditate and download it, so to speak, into your bodily experience. Similarly, the biggest challenge we have, as we discussed in an earlier discourse about the Adam and Eve eating of the tree, the biggest challenge that we have as humans is to overcome the tendencies, our natural tendencies. When I say natural tendencies, I mean those that we're born with and those that are implanted in us through upbringing and cultural influences. By the time we have a conscious awareness of self, that's what we call our natural tendencies. In order to overcome them, it's not enough just to have a peripheral contemplation, a peripheral meditation, and even if it feels like you're moved by it, it's not going to do the trick when the prayer is over, that you can actually have the separation between the stimuli and the response. Rather, they remain as they were before without any change at all. I'm going to skip the parentheses for a moment. The Cholzeh, bottom of 41, and all this is because Lefi Shahi Izbainus Hu B'derech Klalos Levad, because the meditation is a general, peripheral kind of meditation, Ve'ein Za Avodah Klal, and this does not constitute avodah, service, as we mentioned in the last class, that service, right? We said that prayer is avodas halev. It says you should serve Hashem with all your heart. Our sages say, what is service of the heart? That's prayer. What does it mean to service of the heart? In Hebrew, avodah means to work at it. It's labor. You got to work hard at it. If you are only going to contemplate and meditate in a peripheral manner, you're not going, it's not called service. You're not owning it. You're not sweating to bring it into your consciousness. That doesn't work. That's not what we call the work of prayer. Yes.
As a transform, particular concern, a subject of deep interest, and routine, both over and over and over, taking something easier, focus on it. For her, would you say that there is a similarity in function, how some of a driving passion for a particular element? I mean, and you can have a monotonic focus on sacred text.
Sure.
For sure. Do you think the mechanisms are similar?
It sounds like it's similar. I don't know enough about what you're referring to know whether we're moving from ideas, repetition of ideas, to tapping into the energy of the idea.
That they'll put themselves in, constant discomfort and, all hours of the day and night to make sure that they're, able to, see this particular train move by at this particular time. It's discussed among other people who share the same kinds of obsessions or any serious passion. And you engage with people who share the same. You invest in it. That's where your money goes. That's where the heart is.
Yeah. So the question is, what triggers the passion? Is the passion and the commitment to that triggered by an obsession of the heart, or is it triggered by an energy of its own? So again, there may be a distinction in that regard, but I would say the process sounds similar. If I studied what you're referring to, maybe I would be able to parse it out, but where's it born? That's the question. Where's it born? Where does the passion, in the context here, where does the yearning for divine connection come from? Does it come from the heart, or does it come from the head? Where does it start? If it starts in the heart, it's probably self-serving. If it starts in the head, it's probably divine.
Describing that model, something that's far from being fixed.
It could be.
In that case, but it is. That would be a distinction from the kind of process that you're espousing.
No, I think any obsession can be taken to psychology.
Sure, even religion. Right. So, and what's interesting, and I think that's the punchline here, is that if this is done right, you're not spending a whole day thinking about God. That's not really, if you're spending a whole day thinking about God, you need to get a doctor. But anytime you are facing sur meira or aseh toiv, not doing something wrong or doing the right thing, that's the trigger, so to speak, right? Where do you go with the trigger? So if you experienced in prayer, if you actually experienced through this healthy process of internal meditation, giving the time, and now it showed up in your heart. So just like if someone triggers you if you've experienced what the cause of the trigger, you're going to pause before you have the response. The same thing would be true when you encounter, we all experience this, you encounter a challenge, right? A temptation, a tendency. You're on a diet and the pizza shows up, right? And you want to jump into the pizza, right? That's okay. That's normal. The question is, what are you experiencing inside yourself? You're saying, I see the pizza. I really want that pizza, but I own my health. I experience within myself what good health ought to be. I have a tendency to want to gossip. And I really want to gossip now. And what I do is I move away from that wanting to gossip to back to that experience that I had in prayer. That gossip disconnects me from God. And because in prayer I wanted to be connected to God in an authentic way, I'm going to hold myself back from that gossip. But it doesn't mean that I'm thinking about God all day any more than I would be thinking about my wound, the wiring that I have built into me a whole day. It's only when you face something that it will then activate. And maybe that's a distinction if there's an obsession with something, like someone who might have an obsession with religion or with God, that's a pathology that needs a doctor. So what I'm saying is there's a parallel in the sense that the result of it ought to be a deep connection to something. How it manifests itself, I think, is critical to determining whether it's truly healthy or God forbid, unhealthy. No, the prophets struggled. They had real struggles. We're reading about Moses. Moses struggled. King David struggled. These were not people who remained, even Moses, who the Torah tells us was the greatest of prophets, communicated with God face to face. Even in Tanya, where the Alter Rebbe talks about what is the nature of a tzaddik has eliminated his evil inclination, right? He doesn't have any foreign tendencies. Even the tzaddik is not in a perpetual state of divine consciousness. But he never deviates from that because the consciousness of connection to God is right there at the surface, that even before a tendency would be activated, the tzaddik already is experiencing God again. But the tzaddik lives in the real world. He eats food, makes a blessing before he eats. He talks with people. He engages with people. A tzaddik who's a hermit is not doing what God wants. I'll close with a story. The Baal Shem Tov, who's the founder of Hasidism, where these teachings are espoused and brought down to a way that we can all access. So there's a story that's told in a particular town. There was, I'm forgetting the guy's name. It's the story is written in the previous Rebbe's memoirs. It's called the Lubavitcher Rebbe's memoirs. It's translated into English. It's a very joyful, fascinating read. So the Baal Shem Tov would go from town to town. He would engage the simple folk and lift their spirits and so on. But another agenda of the Baal Shem Tov was to go to people who were hermetic in their spiritual service. And there was one town where there was this guy, and he was known as, let's just call him Reb Moshe, Reb Moshe the Hermit. Why was he called Reb Moshe the Hermit? Because in the morning, 2 yeshiva students would come to his house, and he would close his eyes, and they would escort him to the synagogue, and he would sit in a side room off of the main sanctuary, and he would pray there, and he would study there all day. He would eat a little bit come home at the end of the day, and eat a little bread and water. That was his life. And he wouldn't talk. He wouldn't talk unless it was Torah talk. So the story goes, the Baal Shem Tov came to him, and he sat down across from him. It was well known that the Baal Shem Tov had, and he writes about this, that he had adopted a new path in life. He once was staying at an inn with a simple innkeeper and his wife, and he heard them saying over and over again, with God's help, blessed is God, and so on and so forth. And he realized, okay, this is how you bring God into human consciousness, right? God's not abstract. God is, with God's help, this is going to work, with God's, and so on. So he sits down across, and Baal Shem Tov adopted a practice to ask people, how are you doing? How's your wife? How's your children? wanting them to answer, good, thank God. Because in that statement, good, thank God, you bring God into the experience, right? Just like we make a blessing on food, we're bringing a consciousness of God into the experience. So he sits down across from this guy, and he says to him, "How are you?" No response. "How's your wife?" No response. And he did this for a number of days, trying to get the guy to say something, to talk about God for a second. And at one point, the Baal Shem Tov says to him, "How long are you going to prevent God from having his sustenance? How long are you going to hold back God's sustenance from him?" Okay, this got this guy's attention. He looks up and he like, "What are you talking?" Like he doesn't say, but he motions, "What's this all about?" So the Baal Shem Tov says, it says we say this in the prayers. I think this passage is from Psalms. It says, "Va'ata Kodesh." So we know that we receive our sustenance from God. But where does God get his sustenance from? Va'ata Kodesh, you Holy One. Yoishiv, what are you sitting on? What do you sustain yourself from? Tehillah Yisrael, the praises of Israel. When the Jewish people praise God, that's where God gets his sustenance from. When a Jew says, Baruch Hashem, with blessed is God, with God's help, with God willing, that gives God his sustenance. So he says to this guy, you're so wrapped up in your own service of God, you're not giving God what God needs. This is about you. This is not about God. So what I'm saying is that even a tzaddik, in their desire to fulfill God's will, is present in the world. You can't fulfill God's world if you're on a mountaintop separated from reality. You got to eat food. You got to do business. You got to interact with people. You got to take care of your body. But a tzaddik does it all with a consciousness for the service of God because that consciousness is right there. The rest of us, maybe present company excluded, but me anyway, that consciousness is deep inside of me. And if I effectively pray following this process, which we're going to elaborate on in the coming weeks, then I can bring a greater consciousness, a greater awareness, a greater attachment to God, that it becomes easier to activate that, to bring that into my experience. But I'm not going to spend a whole day thinking about God. That's not how we serve God. Okay, to be continued. If anybody wants a book, they're available. Please take one. They're $20. If you don't have cash or whatever, you can just leave